All right, if you thought the 2000 election couldn't get any more interesting, insert Ralph Nader. This election is very much covered, very much talked about in politics, has a lot of controversy around it because of it being so close, because of the situation in Florida with the hanging chads. But if it wasn't for Ralph Nader, we might not have had these issues at all. We might have had a one way victory and not had to worry at all about the controversy in Florida and how that election took weeks to decide. Ralph Nader is one of the most underrated parts in the last 25 years in political elections because the 2000 election is really all about those ballots being thrown out in Florida. But if we look at Ralph Nader's influence here, that might be the real story. Why is this important? Why do we care? Well, when we go to Ralph Nader's own Wikipedia page and read about Ralph Nader, you can see here in the year 2000 there's a spoiler controversy. It says here that in the 2000 presidential election in Florida, George Bush defeats Al Gore by 537 votes, while Nader received 97,400 votes, which led to claims that he was responsible for Gore's defeat, and of course Nader disputed that he helped Bush win. A 2003 study found that Nader's candidacy was a critical factor in Bush's victory, along with a 2004 study finding that Nader voters had the profile of likely voters with a preference for Democratic candidates. So this election was super close. This election was super controversial. But Ralph Nader as a third-party candidate receiving 97,000 votes, monster number for third-party candidates. I wish third-party candidates got more publicity, notoriety, and just really more traction in all of their elections. But they just seem to not do that as much. We had a string of that in the 90s into the 2000s. I did a video on Ross Perot, confusing Ralph Nader and Ross Perot. Ross Perot's influence in the 1992 election, which I will link in the description for you to watch. But yeah, we have to talk about this because they could have made this election a lot closer than it was, or maybe took it in a direction that it wasn't supposed to be. So let's look, shall we? Very close, obviously, 271 to 266, right? We have to break down how we are going to allocate Nader's votes. So again, with researching Nader, looking at some of the policies, if you just look to the side here to get a glimpse quickly, he was a Democrat for 40 years before turning to the Green Party. And we know the Green Party is definitely considered left-leaning. Definitely on the political spectrum is more to the left than like Republican or conservatism. And plus, he was a Democrat just 4 years before this election. So I think it is very fair to say, and that 2004 study points it out, his voters were going to be more left-leaning folks. So I did that breakdown in our ground rules. So let's look at our ground rules for this. We're going to say that 70% of Nader's supporters are going to go for Gore. They're left-leaning. On the opposite side, we'll give 30% of his supporters to Bush, and then I take about 50% of those people that I think will actually vote and actually do the numbers. Someone had a good comment on my last video with Perot that that's confusing. I should just say 35% and 15%, but I like to be super detailed, so I'm sorry if that annoys anyone. But it is a fair call out. So to look at this, if it was out of 100 people, I'd say 70% of them or 70 of them would be supporters for Gore, and then divide that by 2, so 35 of them. And then 30% would be Bush supporters, so 30, divide that by 2, 15. So 35 to 15 out of 100. So that's the simple math there. And then, again, we're just evaluating the numbers. We're not going to get too into maybe like Nader's personality, Bush's kind of funny quirks, Al Gore's voice, or anything like that, because that's, at the end of the day, just opinion. That's just subjective. We want to look at the numbers and see if we can allocate Nader's votes properly and really come up with, does Bush still win the election? Does Gore win the election? Is it more of a win in Bush's favor, right? We want to kind of get to the gist of that. So doing research for this, I found that the consensus was there was about 11 swing states roughly in this. Pretty crazy, pretty odd seeing Oregon be a swing state. I think that might have been due to Nader. But yeah, these states going into it were between a couple of points in the polls and then ended up being within a couple of points. But what's important to know here is that 7 of these 11 just went blue. Okay, so here's the map again. As you can see, the blue wall, Minnesota, Iowa, the WIMPA states all went blue. So Nader's influence in that space isn't going to change anything, right? So if we go to here and we click on Minnesota, for example, if we give 70% of Nader's votes to Gore and 30% of them to Bush, it's just going to make Gore win by more. Doesn't flip the result of the state at all, right? Does that make sense? So in the 2000 election, we can mark off 7 of those blue states just right off the bat. So let's keep Minnesota blue. Let's keep the WIMPA states blue. Iowa blue. New Mexico blue. Oregon blue. That puts Gore at 266. And that is what Gore finished at in this election, right? The other 4 swing states, they all went to Bush. So that's where we had to start to break down, and we had to follow, and it matters here. It runs through these 4. There's not an instance where Bush won Arkansas by, say, 3 points, and Nader got 10 points. So maybe those votes in Arkansas, like there's nothing like that. There's no fringe states like that. It was just the swing states. So we are going to be breaking down in these states. We have to look at each individual one and see how the allocation of votes breaks down. So let's first look in Colorado. Let's move from west to east. And as we can see in Colorado, Nader, big amount, 5% of the votes here in Colorado. 91,000 of his 97,000, I believe he got. Yes, votes total he got here in Colorado. So 5%. That's a monster amount. But we can tell right off the bat, even if we were to give 100% of Nader's votes to Al Gore, it would still be less than Bush, as we can see with the percentages here. So we could automatically see right off the bat, Colorado still goes red in our hypothetical example where Nader does not run in 2000, right? There we go. We can get Colorado crossed off the list. Let's now move into Ohio, our next swing state. And as you can see, very tight. We actually don't even have Nader on our map. So let's go ahead and check in. Nader is not designated here. I'm not sure why. They must have just had him as third party in Ohio. Some states are a little bit different than other states when it comes to the party designation and how the ballot looks, which could actually influence elections. By the way, I don't know why I said with Colorado that this was 91,000 of Nader's 97,000 votes. That was wrong. He got more total votes than that, obviously, across the board. I think that was just in Florida I was referring to. But 117,000 votes for Nader. And again, I can look and see that this state was about 3.5 points, right? 3.5 points edge for Bush. Even if you applied all of Nader's 2.5%, it wouldn't be enough. But our next 2 states are not like that, so I want to give you all a preview of how the math works and how I decided what the outcome would be in this election. So here is the math that I did. You take the current votes, so you had Gore at 2.1 million in Ohio, Bush at 2.3 million. Oh. Like so. And that gives Bush an advantage of 165,000 votes. Nader with 117,000 votes. Again, we know that if you applied all of these, it would still be less than 165,000, but this is just to show you how the math works. You then take 70% of that and assign it to Gore, and then divide that by 2, which would give him 41,000 of the votes. And you assign 30% of that and divide that by 2 to Bush. That would give him 17,000 votes. Add them on to the totals at the end, these totals, right? Because you're just adding these onto these. You'd get this breakdown, and then we do the math here. Bush still wins the state by about 141,000 votes. So Ohio would have been a little bit closer, for argument's sake. That's interesting. Let's move into the states, though, that really, really matter. But first, let's mark off on our map. We're still here. We're still on the side of history. That's actually what happened. Now let's move on. New Hampshire. Super close state. About a 1.2, 1.3 point win for George W. Bush. Interesting to see New Hampshire, which was once really a swing state and has kind of moved into being solid blue, and that will be a future video, so look out for that. But it's interesting to see New Hampshire be so close and go to a Republican. If we go down to the results, as you can see interesting, Nader is listed as a Green Party candidate in New Hampshire. I'm not sure why different states do different things. If someone knows in the comments, please tell us why. But right off the bat, super interesting. We can just tell, again, this is about a 2.1, 2.2 margin of victory. And we have Nader sitting at 3.7%. So we can actually evaluate this, right? Because his threshold is above the difference of Republican candidate George Bush and Democratic candidate Al Gore. So let's go check our math, right? Here it is. And if we look, 266,000 votes to 273,000 votes, Bush only won the state by about 7,000 votes. Nader got 22,000 votes. Divide that, get 70% to Gore, divided by 2. 35% or 30% to Bush, divide that by 2. There's those totals. Add it on at the end, and Bush still wins slightly. Ever so slightly. Bush wins by 2,772 votes in New Hampshire. Wow. We are getting down to the thick of it. We are still in line with what actually historically happened. As you can see, we have New Hampshire red, Ohio red, Colorado red, and that's what we have here on our makeshift map. All that's left is Florida. This election continues to run through Florida. In this case, it's not because of the hanging chads, just because of Ralph Nader. Let's dive into the math, people. Let's talk about this. So in Florida, it doesn't get much closer than this. They go to the third number after the decimal point, 48.847% to 48.838%. As you can see, even the map looks kind of split. Of course, it looks a little bit more red. Most maps do. Most states and counties are rural, and then the more populated states are darker blue to kind of make up for it. But even this map of Florida, like, just kind of looks even, right? So you can just tell how close it was. Let's go down to the results. So there's that 97,000 number that I was referring to earlier when we were talking about Colorado, and I misspoke. But here it is. 500 vote win right there for Bush, and we have 97,000 votes out there for Ralph Nader. That is super, super interesting. Okay. How are we going to break this down? Folks, let's reveal the answer. Let's go look at the math. Let's talk about it. Bam. So 2.912253 to 2.912790. Of course, 537 vote victory. Nader with 97,000 votes, going to give 70% of those to Gore, divided by 2. That's 34,000 of those votes. Going to give Bush 30% of the vote, divided by 2, 14,623 votes. Add those on to the total here. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Al Gore winning the state of Florida by a pretty healthy amount of 18,961 votes. We have history totally changing. We have hanging chads not mattering. And we kind of have Gore winning by, electoral college standpoint, a healthy amount. Not quite 300 electoral votes, but close, 291. This was super fun to break down, super interesting. I want you all to let me know what you think in the comments. If you think this is realistic, if you think I allocated the Nader numbers correctly. I think just Nader being a Green Party candidate, a Democrat for so long, I think he got more conservative as he's aged. He's actually still alive. He's in his 90s. But back in 2000, just 4 years removed from being a Democrat, I think it's very safe to say that at least 70% of his supporters go for Gore. It didn't have too much influence in New Hampshire or even Ohio or Colorado where he got 5% of the vote. But in Florida, there's just a big difference. When I was doing the research for this, when I saw this, I wonder if you guys saw this at first, but 97,000 of those votes outstanding and only a victory of 537, you just know those votes are going to matter. What's really interesting, if you want to be super, super specific, is some of these votes out here, how do they break down? Because, again, the state was won by 537 votes. It's interesting. Even if you throw the Reform Party, all those votes out there, that's still less than the total that Gore had. So what I'm saying there is if you added all those on to Bush's total, it would be less than Gore's still. But there's Libertarian, which is probably right-leaning. There's Natural Law, which I've actually never heard of. Workers' World sounds maybe like Union or Liberal. Constitution, I'm not sure. Maybe that's conservative. Socialist and Socialist Workers sounds liberal. So that might be a fun project one day that we can do. And if I get enough comments or anyone asking to do that, I can really look through all of these votes and try to break down how that would be. That would probably be pretty fun. But I think I am in agreement with this study circling back that Nader absolutely influenced this election, and I think he might have spoiled it for Al Gore. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Again, I'm going to be linking my Ross Perot video in 1992 in the comments or in the description, and I will be doing a video soon in the 1996 election and Ross Perot influencing that with Bob Dole and Bill Clinton. Please let me know what you guys want to see next. Anything negative, positive, you name it, comment it down. We'll talk about it. Thank you all for watching.